I'm a ranger who works at Blackwood National Park. People always ask me if I have inexplicable encounters in my job, and although part of me refuses to taint the tranquility people find at the park, here are some stories that I will never forget. 2 weeks ago, a teenage boy, Logan, went missing. His friends swore they only lost sight of him for a few minutes. We assumed the worst. Bears, a fall, exposure. Yesterday, I found him, or what was left of him. He was sitting cross-legged in the middle of a clearing deep in the woods, rocking back and forth. His clothes were shredded, his skin covered in deep scratches, and his eyes were wrong. Dark, sunken, filled with something not entirely human. I approached carefully. Logan? He didn't look at me. Instead, he whispered, "It follows the lost. It becomes the lonely." A chill crawled up my spine. "Who follows?" "The Hollow Man. It's waiting behind you." I turned, expecting nothing. But the trees, they shifted. A figure stood just at the edge of my vision. Tall, featureless, blending into the shadows. Logan started laughing, a wet, rattling sound. It whispered to me when I was alone. Now it whispers to you. I ran. But ever since that day, I hear a whisper when I'm alone in the woods. And sometimes, when I turn too fast, I see something move in the shadows. I haven't been alone since, and I don't plan to be. I found the girl just before dusk. She was barefoot, clothes ripped, shaking like a leaf in the middle of a dried-up creek bed. Her name was Emily, and she'd been missing for 3 days. I approached slowly, hands up. "Emily, I'm Ranger Carter. You're safe now." She didn't move. Her wide, glassy eyes were locked on something behind me. "It followed me," she whispered. I felt the hairs on my arms stand up. "There's no one there," I said gently. "Come on, let's get you out of here." She didn't argue, just nodded and let me lead her through the trees. But every few minutes, she'd glance back over her shoulder, her breathing sharp and shallow. I told myself she was just traumatized. The mind plays tricks when you're lost in the woods. Then, halfway back to the station, she stopped, dead in her tracks. I turned, confused. She was staring past me again, her face pale as bone. "Emily." "He knows about Ashley," she whispered. My stomach dropped. Ashley was my sister. She died when I was 11. A car crash. There was no way she could have known that. No way. The forest around us suddenly felt wrong. The silence too deep. The air too thick. I didn't turn around. I didn't want to see. But then I heard it. A voice. Low, rasping, right against my ear. "She screamed for you." I grabbed Emily's hand and ran. We didn't stop until we saw the station's lights through the trees. When I looked back, the forest was empty. But I swear, just before the door shut behind us, I heard something whisper my name. We got a report about an abandoned tent near Dead Elk Trail. It belonged to a woman named Diana, missing for a week. When I found it, the firewood was neatly stacked, her boots beside the tent, as if she had just stepped away. Then I saw her. She stood 20 feet away, completely still. Her skin was pale, her clothes torn, but her mouth was too wide, twisted into a grin that stretched ear to ear. I raised my radio. "Diana, can you hear me?" Her head twitched. "He's watching." My stomach dropped. "Who?" She pointed behind me. I turned. Nothing but trees. When I looked back at her, she was closer. Too close. Her lips parted, revealing blackened gums and shattered teeth. "He wears your face when you sleep." I ran. By the time backup arrived, she was gone. Just vanished. No tracks. No trace. That night, I dreamed of the forest, of something crawling into my tent and pressing its face against mine. When I woke up, my mirror was cracked, and for a split second, my reflection wasn't me. Campers always tell stories about the fog that rolls in at dusk, saying they hear voices calling from deep within it. We dismiss it as paranoia. Until last night. I was doing my final patrol when I saw a figure standing at the tree line. A man in tattered clothes, his body thin and twisted. His head jerked up when I called out. Then he screamed. It wasn't a normal scream. It was layered, distorted, like multiple voices crying out at once. Then he bolted into the woods. I followed. Big mistake. The fog thickened, swallowing the trees. Shapes moved in the mist. Too tall, too thin, shifting like shadows without sources. I stopped when I heard whispering. Not words, just sounds. Then something brushed against my arm. I ran blindly, tripping, scrambling through the underbrush. By the time I reached the station, my arm was ice cold where it had touched me. The doctors say there's nothing wrong with me. But sometimes, when the fog rolls in, I hear the whispers again. And I know it's waiting.